Okay, so this just very quickly, the part that just to kind of represents the way that we look at particular aspects of special educational need and disability within our centre. We very much take a sort of neurodiversity approach where we see sort of difference as being part of kind of norm, you know, the norm, so that there's lots of differences that we may have that can overlap, that can, you know, co-occur, and that's for, you know, individuals in the identified SEND, and it's also, you know, part of, you know, normal life as well. Kind of mental health obviously is part of all of our experiences as well. So just thinking of, we think about neurological diversity in the way we think about, you know, other kinds of diversity that maybe we're more familiar with, like cultural and yeah, other aspects of diversity. So we extend that in our programme to think about diversity in relation to sort of additional needs. So in terms of practice then, so that was just clearing the ground a little bit in terms of maybe policy, definitions, you know, maybe our sort of our approach, our ethos in relation to special educational needs. So what you're interested in today is, you know, what does this mean in practice? So I think coming back to some of the discussions we had earlier, you know, I think again, Ian, you were saying, oh, tell me what to do. But one of our key principles actually is start from the child and young person. You know that child and young person actually, so you are the expert and they are the expert. So I think, you know, some of this is saying it's empowering you to say, actually, I do recognise there's something happening here. I do have a voice to speak out about this. So, you know, as a professional or as a carer, you know, start from the child and young person as a unique individual, see their strengths as well as areas which may present difficulties for learning. And for children and young people who have a diagnosis of a learning difficulty or disability, that strengths-based approach is really important as well. Otherwise, it just becomes a kind of deficit model. Another principle is create an accessible and positive learning environment. So, you know, we'll think about how ways you can do this. We'll drill down into that today. You know, how can you make adjustments? I was mentioning adjustments earlier to meet those needs. Okay, so within a school, within a home environment, how is that done? How can we do that? And knowing that child, we can then start to see how we might need to make adjustments to make learning accessible. Focus on the needs of the learners. So it could be communication, social interaction, behavioural life skills. So, you know, again, maybe sometimes we need to put a formal curriculum aside, and particularly in a school or a home or informal environment, think about what does that learner actually, what does that child actually need? Do they need support with communication and social skills or practical life skills more than they need to know, you know, the facts of geography at this point? So I'm going to go through a series of sort of posing questions. Again, you can think about this, it's just to kind of get you thinking really. So one of the first questions is who, you know, who is the child or young person? What is their individual profile of strengths and areas for developmental need? And, you know, when we are talking in the programme about, you know, how to meet needs of all children, and particularly children with special educational needs and disabilities, you know, really getting to know that child and identifying that profile of strengths and need is really key. If you have a child who has already got a diagnosis of maybe a particular area of difficulty like autism, or maybe a more general developmental delay or something like that, then they would typically have an education, a health and care plan, which would have some of these areas of need mapped out there. But again, it won't be exhaustive. You know, there will be more work to do on that. And also, you know, don't see that as a definition. It doesn't define them as an individual or your approach to them. So taking that sort of strengths-based approach as well, you know, not seeing it as just a deficit. What are the strengths that you can build on as well? So thinking about that child, that individual. And then how can you identify strengths and needs? So these are a few ways that you can do it. You might have a formal diagnosis from a health professional. The child might have an education, health and care plan. In your case, Ian, you may be going to be pushing, you know, as the carer to sort of try and identify some of these needs and maybe, you know, look towards that. So we could talk about that later, you know, how to put that in place and get the ball rolling with that. Your informal observation and experience of the child or young people, information from others like the school, and, you know, really last but not very much not least, you know, discussion with the child or young person or through observing them. Okay, so, you know, what do you observe about that individual? And obviously behaviour is a way of communication. So it's a way of communicating needs. So these are things that I think, you know, certainly the last three are very much key to what you will be doing as a parent or caregiver within the home environment. You know, you are really best placed to do that. And then where, you know, what's an appropriate accessible environment to meet needs? Are any adjustments required to meet the needs of the child which might have specific or additional needs? So, you know, if you're thinking about home learning, thinking about the physical environment and the resources and the equipment, but also you'd be thinking about the social and emotional environment to help readiness for learning, confidence, engagement, motivation, those kind of things. So, you know, we're thinking about the physical environment, thinking about your home, you know, how can you use the different areas of your home as a learning environment? You know, might you need to make adjustments? If you have a child, for example, with an autism diagnosis, might they need a quiet space or a sensory space to help them regulate? Might they need to have other safety features around so they don't injure themselves in the home? You know, what equipment might be needed? There might be some specialist equipment that might be needed. Again, if you have a specific, if you already have a diagnosis and an education, health and care plan, those kinds of adjustments should be identified on there. But again, don't just take it from there, you know, use your own initiative, watch what the child is doing, see what maybe they naturally gravitate to. Do they learn better outside, you know, in the kind of forest school setup? You know, can you engage them in learning sort of, I don't know, you know, doing stories or maths better if they're outside, if they're engaging in nature? That can be really powerful. And then just equally as important, if not more so, the social and emotional environment to help with readiness for learning. Developing positive relationships and trust is really key. And obviously you're in a fantastic place to do that if you are the primary carer of that child or a young person. Encouragement, patience, these are things I'm sure you already have and are working with. Creating security, and that's both through sort of patience, encouragement, sort of that kind of safety, but also through boundaries, clear and consistent boundaries and expectations, routines and rituals. Those can be really, really important, particularly again for children with autism diagnoses. Again, transitions, preparation for, you know, different activities, positive reinforcement rather than punishment or sanctions, and having balance of interaction. So thinking about supporting social development for some children and young people who might find that particular area difficult because of the nature of their need. So again, lots of things to think about. So some of these things that maybe are part of your own approach to that child, but also thinking about ways of establishing some of these things that can be helpful. But again, work very much, you know, go back to that first principle. What works with that child? What doesn't work? You know, try things out. We say, you know, the classroom, if we're talking about teaching, you know, is a lab really, in the sense that we're always experimenting, we're always you know, trying things out to see if they work or not. And then what, in terms of the content of what you're doing, you know, the nature of what you're doing with the child, what are the priority areas that the child or young person might need to focus on, and then how much ownership does the child have over deciding these? You know, if you can engage that child in identifying those things and having ownership, that can really help in terms of motivation and engagement. So, you know, if you're working at very early years, we're looking at play and exploration as a way to develop learning. Creativity, that really runs all the way through, but that starts very early as well. You know, that creativity can really be a way to encourage children to take risks and to become more independent. You know, when they're creating something themselves, they're moving away from the control of others. Practical experience and equipment, I was talking about outside, you know, obviously outside play, really important, but as you get older as well, you know, creating and doing things in the natural environment can be really important. Experiential learning, and within the home, that's things like, you know, working alongside you, learning things with you as the parent or caregiver, you know, in the kitchen, around the house, you know, if you are going shopping, all of those kind of things, you know, supporting that child or young person to develop things through alongside you, maybe, and part of that would be you modelling. Following the child or young person's interests as far as you can, you know, to engage them. Obviously, we can't always do that, but thinking about, as well as traditional curriculum areas that child might come home from school with homework for or work to do, thinking again about, you know, does your particular child have needs in terms of areas like communication, social, emotional learning and behaviour and life skills? You know, those might be the key areas really that you need to work on at home to sort of support and develop. And then how key elements of SEND practice. So again, this is just a few top tips I've put together for you. So, you know, in terms of if you are working with a child or young person on either supporting homework or just more generally supporting their development at home or in an informal environment. So thinking about, you know, what's that child or young person's ability to attend or concentrate. You know, you kind of, yeah, you're wasting your time if that child just isn't ready to learn, or, you know, has had enough. You know, you're better to make a break, have a break, or move to a different sort of activity or so on. Think about downtime and rest breaks, be aware if the child is tired or a young person. And think about, you know, child difficulty like dyslexia, for example, you know, just simple tasks will be much more tiring for them. So being aware that, you know, you need to be conscious of more time, maybe more rest time, and changing the focus. It's also really helpful with many children to have a very focused activity, like one task at a time on a table or mat that they move towards. If you give them too many choices, they'll be overwhelmed and they won't be able to engage. But then on the other hand, you also need to have variety, so variety of focus, variety of pace, between focused tasks and maybe more play and movement activities. These are things that we do very much within a learning environment, particularly at primary level, and I think very much in the home you've got that opportunity to do that, and also this opportunity for more multi-sensory learning for children and young people who find retention of information, you know, and learning very difficult. Using pictures and visuals can be really, really helpful, and then lots of repetition. And just be flexible, that's a real key. You know, be prepared to change plans and adapt to that child or young person, see what's working and what isn't working. Just a few more things here in terms of how, thinking about how you communicate, okay? So as a caregiver, or, you know, when we're working within a learning environment, clear, unambiguous communication, simple language. You know, give the child or young person one question at a time, give them time to prepare their answer, you know, having thinking time, having reflection time, it's really important. Think about your language, you know, is it appropriate for the kind of age and stage and understanding of that individual? For children with special educational needs and young people, visual timetables and objects of reference, I'll give you an example of that in a minute, can be really, really helpful, particularly in helping them to structure the day or move from one activity to another. So for example, a rubber duck for bath time, that's an example we often give. But visual timetables, so they know what's coming up next and can see what's happening through the day. That can be really, really helpful for children who struggle with maybe you know, understanding, orientating themselves in terms of the day and time. Lots of repetition, as I said earlier, to revisit and consolidate. You know, when you're coming back to something after a period of time, maybe try and extend it a little bit, you know, do the same thing, but then add a little bit on, you know, add a little bit of a level of challenge. And then scaffolding is a really important, it's a really key concept. So this is you as the sort of supporting adult, modelling something, breaking down the task, and supporting the child or young person to work through each part. So it's that kind of creating a framework, and then you can gradually allow them to be more, you know, you can take away that framework and allow the child to be more independent. And then another thing is making links. Oops, sorry, I don't know why I clicked that. Making links
Anita,
between different subjects to help generalisation. Yes?
Sorry to interrupt. Just to say, we're having a few sound issues with the signal is coming in and out. So I wonder if you want to try popping your camera off for a little bit and see if that helps
I'll do
with
that.
the signal from your
end.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. Yes, it might be my children on their PlayStation. I'll have to tell them to turn it off next time. So different subjects and to help generalisation, because obviously often children with additional needs or disabilities find it difficult to apply their learning in different contexts. So they might learn something in one situation, but then they can't generalise it to another one. So these are just some examples of the rubber duck is an object of reference. That's kind of saying, okay, bath time's coming up. And then the other picture is some visual timetables, examples of lots of visuals and visual timetables. Obviously, this is within a primary setting, but within a sort of secondary setting or with older children, you could have it more in a sort of diary that they carry around with them, you know, so it's not so public. And that's basically it. So I've given you a lot, and hopefully you've heard at least some of it. Sorry if there were difficulties with sound.